The Star Wars galaxy is home to many unique cultures and minor powers, and today we're going to talk about a sector with its own history and traditions as an independent local force to be reckoned with, Tapani. This sector, located in an area called the Colonies, just outside of the core, is home to one of the most famous shipyards in the galaxy, Fondor. But for most of the sector's history, Fondor was considered part of a backwater region to be exploited by the rulers of the historic centers of power in the sector, sometimes called the Lords of the Expanse. The sector also acts as an interesting case study in one of the forms Imperial domination took within such local powers. Tapani history is divided into 5 main eras: the Colonial era, the 12 Kingdoms era, the Dynastic era, the Federal era, and the Imperial era. The map I have set up here is from the Imperial era. It's based on a map in one of the RPG supplements which introduced Tapani. During the Colonial era, the first planet of the Tapani Sector, Pella, was settled by sleeper ships sent out by the core systems, about 10,000 years after many of the core systems were settled and the Galactic Republic had been founded. Colonization spread throughout the various planets within the region, governed under the Pella Compact, which grew out of the councils governing the original sleeper ships. While the Pella worlds were close to the core by modern standards, they were far enough towards the borders of known space at that point to be mostly out of contact with the burgeoning Republic. They did, however, form a close enough trading relationship with the Herglick, another local species. The Herglicks were actually members of the Republic for over a millennium by this point themselves, but it seems like any Republic contact which did exist would have come through the Herglick. In the 12 Kingdoms era, the clans which had been established on the colony worlds began to drift away from Pelagon's influence. Over the course of the first 800 years or so of the period, the clans coalesced into, you guessed it, 12 kingdoms, which remained relatively stable over the next few thousand years, although conflict between them was fairly consistent. Looking again at our house map from the Imperial period, while we don't know the identity of the 12 kingdoms from this era, we can be pretty confident that Molantha, Pelagia, and Mekit existed at this point, while others came into existence or died out over the following millennia. Contact with aliens expanded from mostly just being with the Herglick to the planet Merlist, home to another species which would become integrated into several parts of Tapani society. And settlement expanded into the Grey Free Worlds territory on the map, an area which wouldn't come to be included in main house territory, but where every house would develop at least some presence, setting up either embassies or taking part in resource exploitation. The Tapani houses, which came to exist in this and other periods of Tapani history, developed a strict code of conduct and created a stratified society which would essentially never change throughout galactic history. The noble families were always on top, although the specific noble families might come and go, and the common people were never to be granted any political power, and true social mobility was incredibly rare. Breaking these codes of conduct through things like lying would typically mean being expelled or ostracized, although the specific definitions of what could count as lying or what was actually against these codes of conduct would often be bent by the houses in various ways, because they're all just a bunch of rich people doing whatever they wanted. Attempts to overthrow this society were apparently very rare, since according to the RPG sourcebooks, the Tapani common people were apparently just bootlickers who liked this system. Even though things like slight offenses against nobles were often punishable by execution up until the modern era. From 7348 to 7328 BBY, or years before the Battle of Yavin, Prince Shay Tapani from House Molantha began a brutal campaign to unify the 12 houses under Molantha rule, which ultimately destroyed 3 of the houses entirely. One of these houses was called House Nidantha. After they left the Tapani sector, many members of House Nidantha ended up being enslaved by the Sith. Some of the descendants of these exiles would end up in the service of the Sith during the Great Hyperspace War, and there's some other relationships between the Sith and Tapani that we'll get to in a bit. But Tapani's Unification War ended at the Battle of Shindra's Vale. In later eras, this would be reenacted during the Unification Gala, something still celebrated even by the time of the Battle of Yavin. But despite the destruction of 3 entire houses, Tapani distributed the power to all remaining nobles fairly evenly after the conflict ended, rather than just favoring his own house or his allies, something which many credit at least partially for the Empire's 6,000-year duration. The free worlds, barely colonized in the prior era, became more significant in this period. Of particular importance were Talon and Neona, which were empowered by their location on the newly formed passage shown on the map here to Giju, which was the capital of Herglick space. Talon especially would grow in power over the following period, becoming one of the biggest shipyards in the region and remaining important throughout the rest of galactic history. This period also coincided with the various Sith Wars of the Republic and the rest of the galaxy, which marked one of the first known periods of Tapani involvement in important galactic affairs. High Lord Tridum XI of House Macrosa married a noblewoman from the planet Vajun, Viscountess Mariah. She converted the Force Order of House Maketi, the Macrosa, to the dark side. This drew the attention of House Pelagia, and when the Macrosa and House Maketi openly aligned with Sith Lord Exar Kun, House Pelagia aligned with the Jedi, including Jedi Knight Ulic Keldroma, to oust the Macrosa in a war called the Cleansing of the Nine Houses. The High Lady of the Maketi, Breswalt III, used this opportunity not just to fully eliminate two rival houses, the Melissus and Barong House, but also to like this video and subscribe for more. The Macrosa Order was believed to have been wiped out in this conflict, however they survived in secret, even taking down a Sith Lord, Belia Darzu, during the New Sith Wars, 1,000 years before the rise of the Empire, but 3,000 years following their supposed destruction here. The dynastic period as a whole included 16 dynasties sourced primarily from the Melantha, Maketi, and Pelagian houses. The final ruling dynasty were the Capella, whose rule coincided with a return to a house-based regionalism. This ended in the year 11,138 of the Tapani calendar, which is a reference to George Lucas's other film THX 1138, which gets referenced throughout Star Wars in a variety of ways. But there was a military coup here empowering a reformist political movement, comprising members from all of the remaining houses. Once in charge, this reformist movement formed a federation. The capital of this federation was on Procopia, which was where Shea Tapani had also established the capital of the Tapani Empire thousands of years before, which remained outside the control of any individual house into the modern period. A great council of nearly 2,000 members was formed, with the federation led by a prime minister, traditionally from the Pelagia or Maketi house. There are 15 total votes in the council, distributed based on the number of inhabitants in the province of each major house. This system remained largely in place during the Imperial period, where the Maketi and Melantha had 3 votes each, Rena and Kadrian had 2, and Barnaba, Calypsa, and Pelagia each had 1. There were also a lot of smaller sub-councils, most important of those was the Senate. True decision-making power tended to rest with a body called the Council of 10, which naturally had 35 members. In Tapani year 11,234, the Federation officially joined the Republic, and many members of House Pelagia officially joined the Jedi, furthering their relationship from the Sith Wars and leading to Force-sensitive ruling bloodlines. Keep in mind, the source book this faction is from came out before the prequels, so things like the Jedi not marrying and not having kids weren't really known. In a lot of cases, this kind of early inconsistency just gets retconned into a splintered Jedi group existing, like the Corellian Green Jedi, who we'll get to in another video. Just as important as joining the Republic, though, was the creation of a new major hyperspace lane through Tapani space. Traditionally, because of the relative youth of the region, travel could be quite difficult and involved shorter jumps, but the Shapani bypass was created through the Free Worlds, previously thought to be of little importance to the Lords of the Expanse, at least politically. This ballooned the importance of worlds which were along the bypass, like Talon, Alaron, and Merlist, which marked the start of a decline in the importance of the noble houses as well. The houses were largely left to their own disputes under the Republic, but the rise of the Empire after the Clone Wars would come with a significant shift in the local power dynamics. Because of the close relationship between the Jedi and House Pelagia, Maketi was quick to align itself closely with Palpatine to assist in the elimination of Pelagian Jedi. This purge ingratiated Maketi to the Empire, along with its supporters in Rena and Calypsa, forming a new ruling bloc in the Great Council which pledged itself to the Empire. But, as you can probably imagine, this support from the Empire came with giving up a lot of their power to do just whatever the Empire wanted to do. Pelagia, on the other hand, was greatly diminished, with much of its territory taken by other houses, especially Calypsa, leaving only a few planets in its possession, some of which were rendered uninhabitable. The discovery of a cache of lightsabers belonging to Pelagian Jedi by nobles after the house's near destruction also reignited what some sources claim to have been an older bit of technology called the Lightfoil. These were a type of lightsaber that was largely just worse in every way. They were less powerful, but they became fun toys for the nobles, and they were used a lot in duels. This led to the creation of essentially a class of noble called saber rakes. These tended to be younger Tapani nobles who would go around cutting each other's limbs off. So prosthetics were in pretty high demand in the Tapani Sector. These duels also led to the very funny image on the front of one of the RPG source books. Some sources claim the original Lightfoils were given to the Tapani by the Macrosa during their Scythy days. Lightfoils spent a lot of Tapani history getting banned, and they were especially frowned upon by the Inquisitors and the Imperial Ubictorate in the Imperial period, because there was some fear that the Lightfoils were actually just a way to show support for the Jedi, even though a lot of the saber rakes didn't really know that much about who the Jedi were. Because Imperial attention was elsewhere, especially earlier on in the Empire, while the sector was under a moth, the Great Council was left to largely continue as it was, as long as it was meant supporting the Imperial agenda. The Empire's rule was also an excuse for further humanocentric tendencies to take over. Aliens were always somewhat marginalized in Tapani society, but it was usually more of a passive prejudice applied to everyone considered to be lower class, held by the ruling nobles, something which the general populace largely had no issue with. Most of the economic and political and social benefits of society were aimed towards the noble houses, and aliens were not part of the noble houses. But as the Empire took over, this turned into more outright hostility, especially among the various Tapani nobles who had served in the Republic military during the Clone Wars, going to the core and then bringing a lot of those prejudices against aliens back. Most notable among these was a Maketi noble named Octavian Grant, who served as one of the first military moffs in the Clone Wars, one of the highest ranks in the Republic Navy, and who would go on to become one of the Empire's most strategically savvy Grand Admirals. The noble houses were able to maintain their own militaries in this period, usually just for civil defense. No more than 10% of their navies could have hyperdrives, something that is kind of reminiscent of the restrictions on hyperdrives from the old Rusan Reformation in the Republic as a whole. But because these house navies were separate from the Imperial Navy and the nobles who would have been sent to serve in the Republic Navy, they tended to not have the same anti-alien bias ingrained. Herglics tended to be pacifists, although they could still serve in the military in some form if they wanted to, but there were a lot of Merlisti who became even captains of vessels within house navies. Despite that close association between the noble houses and the Republic, Fondor, a burgeoning shipyard in the Free Worlds, helped in its growth by the Shapani Bypass, had been one of the CIS's most valuable shipyards in the Clone Wars. And territorially, Fondor and maybe Talon were kind of the only notable parts of Tapani's involvement in that conflict, despite the fact that the Free Worlds were usually kind of peripheral to political power within the Expanse. The Free Worlds historically had their own economic and political organizations as well. One of the most important of those was called the League of Tapani Free Worlds. All of the settled Free Worlds had some sort of representation within the League, although only the 5 most powerful were voting members. These were Talon, Neona, Alaron, Lemur, and Merlist. Despite Fondor's later importance, it was not considered one of the most important of the Free Worlds at this time. We've already talked about Octavian Grant, but another important Imperial was from the Tapani Free Worlds. This was future Grand Moff and Warlord Zinj, who was from Fondor. The Free Worlds were also allowed to maintain their own navy called the Free Worlds Common Navy, but they were subject to significant restrictions just like the House navies. The Maketi had the most powerful House Navy at this point, consisting of 12 Victory Star Destroyers supported by other small craft. Before Imperial occupation, Pelagia seemed to have a more powerful navy, including at least one 2,500-meter-long ship, the Pelagia Star. This ship was disabled in an attack by 3 Star Destroyers, and then it was just referred to as Pelagia's Moon. It remained in orbit and acted as a kind of space station around Pelagia. The Empire maintained a significant military presence in the sector, but rather than centering their political or military rule on the historical political capital of the Federation, Procopia, they built their operations out of Talon. The Empire nationalized the Free Worlds entirely, creating the Shapani subsector, and Talon became not just the capital of the League of Tapani Free Worlds, but also an important Imperial shipyard and ordnance depot alongside Fondor. The planets of the major houses, historically the powerhouses of the region, began to languish somewhat in galactic obscurity, and really only Talon and Fondor would be in any kind of position of galactic importance going forward. Despite the houses' seeming allegiance to the Empire, Tapani and the Tapani subsector were some of the earliest areas to throw off Imperial rule and join the New Republic. We don't really have much information from within the sector at this point, but this could have been the result of more political maneuvering by the houses. Without the support of the Empire, Maketi might have lost a lot of its political power, and their historical rivals, the Pelagia and their Cadrian allies, might have been able to finally overthrow Maketi rule. The sector remained in the New Republic and then Galactic Alliance through the Yuuzhan Vong War, where they were represented by Senator Kavarm Jia, who served on the Military Oversight Committee, likely a concession based on the importance of Talon and Fondor as shipbuilding facilities. During the Second Galactic Civil War, 40 years after the Battle of Yavin, Fondor and Talon rebelled alongside Corellia against the Galactic Alliance, presumably taking the entire sector with them. Fondor was regularly the site of important naval engagements as well, including a battle in the Yuuzhan Vong War which saw the majority of not just the Yuuzhan Vong fleet present, but also the allied Hapen Armada, destroyed by the firing of Centerpoint Station from Corellia. But the rest of the sector rarely factors heavily into galactic events. That's going to do it for our look at the Tapani Sector and the Lords of the Expanse. Thank you for watching, and I hope you've enjoyed the video. This topic was done at the request of Rex, so if there's another topic you'd like to see covered on the channel, let me know in the comments.